Bookworms, welcome back to my channel where we talk all things books. I mostly do book reviews, but every now and then I also do list videos like this one. Now, if you've been watching for a while, you know that I love the fantasy genre. Similarly to its cousin, sci-fi, I feel like it's often put in a little stereotypical box of either children's stuff or crazy, weird creatures. But it is so much more. So today I decided to share with you some of the best fantasy books, in my humble opinion, and focus solely on books that are not for kids or young adults. Now, that is not to say in any way that there's anything wrong with Harry Potter or Twilight. Okay, Twilight isn't really good, or The Hunger Games, but either I am too old and cynical, or people online seem to think only these exist. So, in no particular order, here are some great fantasy books of all sorts of subgenres that may be also enjoyed by young people, but aren't meant for young adults, and therefore lack teenage main characters and love triangles and all of those tropes that we've seen time and time again. Just as a reminder that there are more out there. But because I wanted to condense this list to only 10 books, I have to give some honorable mentions. First, we have The Unlikely Escape of Uriah Heep by A.G. Parry. This is an awesome book about a man who can bring book characters to real life, and the only reason the book is not actually on this list is because I put a different book by the same author here. And second honorable mention goes to The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. This is a classic of Russian literature about a tortured artist, his beloved Margarita, and the devil. Another honorable mention is No One Gets Out Alive by Adam Neville, a terrifying haunted house story about both fantastical and real dangers a young woman has to face. And now, to the actual list. Let's start with a classic of all fantasy classics, which is of course the Lord of the Rings trilogy by J.R.R. Tolkien. I could have also added The Hobbit to this, but it was actually meant for young people. By the way, if you are looking for a couple of young-oriented books, fantasy or otherwise, that are actually better than some cliches we often see, I made a list about them as well. I will link it in the description box. So, Lord of the Rings. It's famous enough for me not to need to say too much. It's what you call high fantasy, which basically means the book takes place entirely in a fantastic world, unlike Harry Potter, for example, that combines our world with elements of fantasy. This is an epic adventure with such amazing full lore, characters, and creatures. Now, I will admit that sometimes it's not very easy to read this book due to Tolkien's tendency to describe every little detail in every little thing, and the number of leaves on that tree, and the daily habits of that character who appeared for 2 seconds. But if you can handle this, you're promised to have such an amazing adventure with Frodo, Aragorn, Gandalf, and others. If you're into fantasy, at least give this one a try. Next, I want to recommend Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. Generally speaking, most of Gaiman's books could fit on this list. He writes mostly dark fantasy, and if that is your cup of tea, you should check both him and Kim Newman out. Neverwhere is about a man who finds himself in an alternative London full of dark magic and dangers. As he tries to help a young girl chased by assassins, he also tries to find his way back home. If something like Lord of the Rings is a little too heavy for you, Neverwhere is a fast-paced, fascinating book with both gruesome moments as well as heartwarming and even funny ones. Next, let's talk about the only book that I actually don't have physically to show you, and this is The Green Mile by Stephen King. When people say they want to read King but don't know where to start, I always recommend The Green Mile, which is also one of my favorite books by Stephen King. This tragic and magical story takes place on death row in a prison in the 1920s, and its protagonist is a guard called Paul. When a kind, uneducated black inmate arrives, Paul soon realizes that he isn't just a regular guy, but has magical healing powers. And soon Paul starts doubting this good-hearted man could have done the crimes that he's been accused of, and tries to look further into the case. Now, as opposed to Lord of the Rings, this is low fantasy because this sets in our own world but has elements of fantasy in it. This can be a good match for people who don't want to read anything too magical. The Green Mile is such an amazing book, and unless you really hate anything fantasy, why are you watching this video, by the way? I highly recommend it. But note it has some really hard to read moments. Now let's talk about dragons, because what's fantasy without dragons? Also, dragons are awesome. I love dragons. I actually have 2 dragon-related books for you, and the first one is the Temeraire series by Naomi Novik. This is the first book, and it's called His Majesty's Dragon. This is an alternate history series with 9 books that takes place around the beginning of the 19th century and the time of the Napoleonic Wars. I'm sure you all heard about Napoleon Bonaparte, but basically he thought he could rule the world and fought a bunch of European countries to prove them just that, but they didn't really like it. And that was my 5-second synopsis of the Napoleonic Wars. Very accurate. Anyway, the world of Temeraire is basically just like ours, but it has dragons, and the army is using them because it's a lot better than horses, I guess. We follow Captain Lawrence from the British Royal Navy and his dragon, Temeraire, as they serve in various battles. Temeraire is a very unique dragon, and he and Lawrence develop a deep friendship. This series is so good, interesting, and also very mature. And I just love combination of real history and fantasy. And this is such a well-built fantasy world. And also stay tuned, because this will not be the last entry of that genre. The second dragon book is actually a recommendation of an author, and her name is Anne McCaffrey. At first I thought I will mention here Dragon's Song, which is my favorite book by her, but its protagonist is a teenager, so despite being mature, I said this list will not have any teenager protagonists. So as a McCaffrey representative, I chose Dragon Flight, which is the first book on her series, The Dragon Riders of Pern. In Pern, the world of the series, dragons exist, as you can imagine, and in Dragonflight we follow Lessa, a noblewoman whose entire family was murdered and she survived by pretending to be a servant. And although her goal eventually is to restore her original title, she also finds herself connected to a dragon. In this world you have dragons and dragon riders, and a dragon chose Lessa, and the two share a telepathic connection. Now, this book was written in the 60s and has a very classic feel to it, if you know what I mean. But it's also a mystery with a really interesting twist, not to mention a book from that time with a strong female character done right. So, go McCaffrey. Also, I have to mention without spoilers that technically this series is not fantasy but science fiction, even though it reads very much like fantasy, so I decided to include it here. Imagine Star Wars, but with dragons instead of spaceships and androids. It's more fantasy than sci-fi. Anyway, we talked about some serious stuff, but mature adult fantasy can also be funny. In fact, I think you need to be an adult in order to understand the hilarity of the ridiculous humor of the Discworld series by Sir Terry Pratchett. This is one book, again, this is one to represent an entire series. Like the previous entry, this is more of an author recommendation than a specific book one. The Discworld series takes place in a different fantastical world with vampires and trolls and wizards and a librarian who turned into an ape and the embodiment of death. His name is Mort, by the way. If you like crazy British humor, you will love the Discworld series. It's nonsensical, witty, surreal, and all around wonderful and very entertaining. There are a couple of characters and niches in Discworld, and every fan has its own favorite. You can like the books revolving around Rincewind the Wizard, or the more mystery-oriented books about the city guard, and a fan favorite is Mort, who is, death. By the way, I mentioned Neil Gaiman before, and here is a bonus recommendation. He and Pratchett wrote a book together. It's called Good Omens, which combines perfectly Pratchett's humor and Gaiman's dark themes. It's comical, but not as bizarre as Discworld. And in any case, it's a million times better than this series. And you can argue with me about it in the comments. Next, let's talk about the super magical and beautiful The Night Circus by Aarin Morgenstern. This fantastical novel, literally, takes place in Victorian England and centers around the titular circus, a mysterious and elusive operation without a fixed schedule that only appears at night. The acts of the performers seem to defy the laws of reality, Could this be real magic? But it isn't all just fun and games, because behind the scenes, two great magicians each teach a protege in order for them to eventually battle each other in magic. This book is truly magical and fantastical, mostly when it comes to the descriptions and the visualization of the circus. I will say, however, that we have a pretty cliché love story here and less than well-written characters, but I feel it's not really the point here. Anyway, I really need to read this book again. From lovey-dovey beauty, let's get bloody and gory, because who said all fantasy books have to have the same tone? Next, we have probably the biggest horror classic ever, Dracula by Bram Stoker. We all know the story, right? Set in the late 19th century, this epistolary novel focuses on the hunt after an evil vampire who sucks people's blood, making them despicable creatures like himself and threatening to destroy the entire city. There is a reason that this book is still famous today and that it's got so many adaptations throughout the years. This book is just brilliant, it's creepy and has such compelling characters and definitely still holds today. I will, however, warn you that if you've never read a book from that time before, that the Victorians tended to take their time, and in the midst of chasing a monster and worrying about a friend who's losing blood, you will read all about what the characters ate for breakfast and what exactly everyone around the table were wearing. That is just how they wrote back then, but the book is still fascinating and a brilliant horror book. Next is a book that I first read many years ago, and this is The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley. This is a retelling of the legend of King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, Merlin, and all of those guys. But the protagonist here is Morgaine, or Morgan Le Fay, who is considered as the villain in those legends. The book was written in the early 80s, before it was very popular to write books from the point of view of alleged villains. So we follow Morgaine, a sorceress trying to fight back against the Christian oppression of the Druids and pagans. I remember this book being a bit cumbersome, but I loved its length, how epic it was, how it spanned so many years, and how it takes something we all know like the legend of Arthur Pendragon and gives it a twist. And in later years, it reminded me of Circe by Madeline Miller, the story of a misunderstood witch who is usually portrayed as a villain in mythological stories. And lastly, I promise you another historical novel with a fantasy twist, and here it is, A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians by H.G. Parry, whom I'm also mentioned before. This time we're back in Europe of the late 18th century, or the time of the French Revolution. But in this book's world, some people are born with magical powers. Some can read minds, some can control certain elements, etc. And they are considered criminals and forced to be registered as magical. While in our history, the French Revolution was about the poor people rebelling against the spoiled monarchy, in this novel it was all about discrimination against magical people. We have Maximilien Robespierre here as a character. We have William Pitt, Toussaint Louverture, Camille Desmoulins. All were real people combined in this brilliant book, and I hope I also pronounced all those French names correctly. Sorry if I didn't. I cannot put it in words. This book was just so good, and Parry combined historical events and her well-written fantasy world so well. Even though I personally felt more connected to her other book, The Unlikely Escape of Uriah Heep, I felt like this one matches this list a little better. And those were 10 fantasy books aimed for adults. Again, guys, no disrespect for younger books. I am a huge Harry Potter fan, for example, but let's break the stereotype that fantasy is silly or frivolous. Fantasy can be profound, it can be epic, it can be scary, it can be funny, it can be so many things. So guys, thank you for watching my video. I really hope you liked it. If you did, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to my channel for more bookish videos. Also, write me a comment below. Let me know what's your favorite mature fantasy book, and if you're a Discworld fan, which niche or which character you mostly follow. Anyway guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.